Let's take a look at checking out some of the scopes to see how even your green screen is lit. So to do that, we're going to fire up Adobe Premiere Pro, make a new project here. Now, because the green screen footage that I shot was on a Canon 7D, I'm going to select this digital SLR preset here, 1080, and hit OK. Now we need to import our footage. Okay, so I'm just going to use this last one here. Now this is the file that was shot in the green screen setup video. So we don't need the audio here, so I'm just going to right click, unlink that, and delete it here. Now, what we want to check out is how evenly lit this is right here. So what we can do, go up to the menu here, grab a reference monitor. Now, the reference monitor has a lot of different things you can view on it, from composite video, which is basically what's happening over here, to the alpha of the video, and then you have a number of scopes. And we're going to check out this scope right here. It's under the YC waveform, and this is basically a lumiscope. So this is kind of a horizontal representation of brightness. You see, when I come into the picture here, you can see that this right here is my body and arms, and it's not so much a representation of what's happening kind of vertically, but where the brightness levels are. You can see my arm here is brighter than just about everything else because it's a little bit closer to my key light here. So that's registering higher on this scope. But if we look at the very beginning here, we can see that we're getting a reading of about 60, and it's dipping off here, but it's fairly even. And the funny thing is, it looked a little bit more even in real life, but now I can see that there's a little bit of a punch over here from one of my lights, but not a problem because this is okay. So let's check out another clip here. Now this is a test that I ran a few days ago. I'll actually leave the audio in this one, because in my test here, what I did is I shot the green screen, and for this test I filled up the screen a little bit more, and I was using a different lens, but similar in focal length to what I shot the tutorial with. White balance 4600. And then you can hear I was kind of calling out as I rolled footage what my settings were so that I knew how to replicate it with the same light setup. Now, if I was getting really technical, I could measure exactly how far away the lights were from the screen, and that would definitely help me to dial it in. But let's check out our reference monitor here. So as we roll in this footage, f4.5. So this is f4.5, and you can see that the line is fairly flat. There's a dip in the edges, and this actually comes from the lens itself exhibits a little bit of vignetting. The vignetting is kind of a darkening around the edges, and this can be kind of nice in video or photos. In fact, a lot of times I'll add vignettes to videos because it kind of focuses the attention on the middle of the screen. So that can be good for normal footage. For green screen footage, it's not so great. So that's partially what you're seeing here in this dip. Because the lens is doing a circular image, but it only gets picked up on this rectangular sensor, you're kind of only seeing it here in the corners. So this middle section here is not showing so much vignette. This is basically telling me at ISO 160, it's showing you all of the different luminance values at different f-stops. 4. So this is f4. And you'll see that with this lighting setup and the camera about that far away, we're getting right about 60 and just a little bit of dip. Now, it looks like I may have done the same exact thing with the lighting here as I did down here. But if I roll this to the beginning here, you can see very, very similar luminance range here. Now the color is slightly different, and that's because I used a different white balance for the tutorial. But rolling, I mean, this took, I don't know, 50 seconds or so, and I just rolled through some footage. Up here is like f1.8, which is basically, that looks like it's almost clipping right in the center there. But it shows you, and you can also definitely see a lot more of the vignetting here, but it shows you kind of how you can do a quick test. Now this is shutter speed 50, ISO 160, and just scrolling through some f-stops on the camera until I found the right exposure. Now when I went to shoot the tutorial kind of setup of the green screen, I knew which settings I needed to match. So it was ISO 160, shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, and f4 would give me around 60 on the LumaScope. Now you can also kind of measure how green your green screen actually is with this right here. It's called the vector scope. And this is basically a representation of the color wheel. So because the screen is predominantly filled with this green color, you're seeing the green kind of extend into this area here. Now I believe if we throw a crop on this footage and we just crop the bottom, and yep, and now you see it's all green because we've just isolated this section right here. And it's possible if we go back to the LumaScope that we get even a slightly more flat line here because we're not seeing some of that other stuff, which is darker, so it's actually showing up down here, but you get the idea. Now, if I was using really oddly colored lights, or the green color wasn't exactly right, this green would be shooting off in this direction or shooting off in this direction. For instance, if I was using tungsten lights and I didn't have the white balance set correctly, this would probably be shooting off more towards this, which is the kind of orange, yellow, and red. Here's the red, here's the yellow and orange are in this neighborhood. And then we get magenta, blue, and cyan. But you can see it's not exactly green, it's just a little bit to the blue, but it's pretty close. So that's how you want to check your footage to make sure that you've got enough kind of green juice and the camera settings are all right and your lights are all right. And that's cool. Now also, if you were at a camera setting that didn't work, say you were using a DSLR and you were using a prime lens and you were at, let's say, f1.2, you'd have a really, really super shallow depth of field depending on your distance away from your subject. So that could be problematic. If you were at that f-stop and you didn't have enough of your subject in focus, what you'd have to do is stop your camera down so you increase your depth of field and add more lights. So you juice up the green luminance back to where it would need to be. This so happened that f4 at this distance worked okay. It was a little bit shallow of depth of field. It wasn't hyper sharp at all distances, but it worked okay for this tutorial. If I was doing something on the larger green screen, I may have used a slightly wider focal length, and that would get me a little bit deeper depth of field. So I wouldn't have that to deal with.